Funeral directors are people who have decided to serve the dead. In this video, we're going to help you answer the question, should you become a funeral director in 2021? We're going to go over the latest salaries, job market statistics, and the latest trends. Coming up. Hey everyone, Stephen Heck here with Career Watch, where I help you with your career search. If you've been enjoying the video, hit that thumbs up to support the channel. And if you're a funeral director, let us know in the comments below what you enjoy and what you dislike about the occupation. Funeral directors have several roles and responsibilities. Funeral directors schedule funerals, burials, and cremations. They consult with families or friends of the deceased to arrange funeral details such as obituaries, casket selections, and plans for services. They direct and supervise embalmers, funeral attendants, death certificate clerks, cosmetologists, and other staff. Because funeral homes are businesses, funeral directors sell funeral services, products, and merchandise. During the funeral directors offer counsel and comfort for families and friends of the deceased. Other than that, they schedule work hours for funeral home or contract employees and manage the business side of a funeral home. Regarding becoming a funeral director, it actually doesn't require a bachelor's degree to become a funeral director. It typically requires an associate's degree in mortuary science. According to the Occupational Information Network, 69% of funeral home directors have an associate's degree, about 15% have a bachelor's degree, and 16% have some kind of professional degree. Although do keep in mind that pretty much in every US state, you do have to be licensed before you can begin working as a funeral home director, and you do have to complete an apprenticeship. Regarding the pay of funeral directors, they actually do really well, especially compared to similar occupations. In 2019, the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that the average base salary for a funeral home director was $95,220. This was greater than embalmers, funeral attendants, psychologists, and social workers, although funeral home directors were out-earned by HR managers. This is for employed funeral home directors, which actually are in the minority of funeral home directors. 2/3 of funeral home directors in 2019 were self-employed, meaning they own their own business. For funeral home directors that own their own business, we don't know what the average base salary is. The government doesn't keep track of that. And if it does through the IRS, they don't release it to the public. So they could make a lot more or a lot less than the average base salary. For employed funeral home directors, their wages have been increasing over time. In 2012, the average base salary for a funeral home director was $79,930. This rose to $95,220 in 2019. So just in 7 years, there was a total wage growth for funeral directors of about $15,000, which comes out to almost $2,000 per year. If you were to plot this average yearly wage growth into the future, in 2021, the average base salary would be around $99,000, and by 2029, this would rise to $114,000 per year as a base salary, which doesn't include benefits, overtime, and other forms of compensation. The other thing to keep in mind is there's quite a distribution of pay. The top 10% of funeral directors tend to make a lot more than the other percentiles. A starting salary would probably be around $44,000 nationally. This would be the 10th percentile of pay for funeral directors, whereas the top 10% of funeral directors earn more than $161,000 per year. One of the variables that goes into this is actually geography, and it's actually surprising which states tend to pay funeral directors more than others. You would think California and other coastal cities would be at the top of the list for pay for funeral directors, but this really isn't the case. In fact, the highest paying state for employed funeral directors in 2019 was the state of Michigan, where the average base salary for a funeral home director was $137,840. Meanwhile, the lowest paying state for funeral home directors was found to be the state of New Mexico, where the average base salary was around $59,000. So there's quite a difference in base pay among funeral home directors across the country. So that covers the compensation of funeral directors. Only 1/3 of funeral directors, by the way, because 2/3 of them are self-employed. Next, what is the job market like? Is there a lot of hiring going on for funeral directors? Is it really competitive to get a job if you do want to become employed rather than self-employed as a funeral director? The first thing to understand is this is a tiny workforce. There's actually not a lot of funeral directors across the United States. In 2019, the US Bureau of Labor Statistics found that there was 9,400 employed funeral directors. This is 1/3 of them. And then based off math, there'd be about 18,000 self-employed funeral directors. But just based off the number of employed, this was greater than the number of embalmers, but there's a fraction of funeral directors in the workforce compared to the total number of HR managers, psychologists, and there is exponentially more social workers, employed social workers across the country than there are funeral directors. Because this is a pretty small occupation, sometimes it can be hard to find a job in your particular neighborhood or your particular state. So often with small niche occupations, you actually have to travel across state lines sometimes to find employment. And to be honest, there hasn't been much job growth over the past 7 years since 2012. In 2012, the government recorded 9,130 employed funeral directors across the country. This rose to 9,400 in 2019. So a gain of about 270 employed from 2012, which comes out to about 34 jobs per year. So not only has there been limited job growth for funeral directors, the government is actually not at all optimistic about the number of employed funeral directors over the next 10 years. Very few occupations are shrinking. This is one of the few occupations where the government thinks that there's going to be far less employed funeral directors in 2029 than there are in 2019. There's very few occupations like this. So the government is anticipating about 600 less jobs, less employed funeral directors in 2029 compared with 2019. Whereas based off history, based off the 34 jobs gained per year over the past 7, based off the historical trend, there'd be around 9,700 in 2029. Finally, we can gauge how competitive it is to get a job in this occupation. We can do this by comparing the number of employed against the number of job postings. And this can kind of give us an estimate of how competitive it is to get a job as a funeral director. But one of the variables I keep bringing up is 2/3 of them are self-employed. So this might not be the best metric to use for this particular occupation. With other occupations, it's great because usually like 95% and above are employed in a given occupation. But with this one, because 2/3 are self-employed, it throws everything off. But basically, I found the number of job postings searching for 4 different keywords in the title of job postings across the country using Indeed. So I searched for funeral director, funeral manager, mortuary manager, and prearranged funeral. This gave me about 470 job postings across the United States. We can compare this to 9,400 employed. So there's about 20 times as many employed as there are job postings. So it's competitive, but it's not as competitive as, say, actually, I was just looking at plumbers and electricians. That's actually more competitive than this. So I wouldn't say there's a shortage of funeral directors, but it's not oversaturated either. And keeping in mind that there's so many self-employed that it's probably throwing this off. So just based off the number of job postings compared to employed, there's about an even saturation. So that covers the job market for this occupation. Next up, would this occupation be compatible with your interests? And to do this, definitely look into taking a free RIASEC assessment online. This way you can compare your interests into 6 different themes against people in different occupations that have also taken a RIASEC assessment. For funeral directors, they actually score really high in the enterprising and conventional themes. People that score high in the enterprising theme, they tend to be pretty ambitious, pretty competitive. They tend to be really good at sales, assertive, energetic. These are like kind of your business owners, people that really enjoy owning a business and being a little bit more entrepreneurial. The other high score would be the conventional theme, and this theme is associated with order. People that score high in the conventional theme tend to love organizing different things. They tend to be drawn to fields like accounting and just kind of taking a mess and organizing it. So if you took a RIASEC assessment and you also scored high in the enterprising and conventional themes, this occupation might kind of line up with your interests. So as you can see, there are pros and cons to becoming a funeral director in 2021. The average base salary is pretty high, especially for an occupation that just requires an associate's degree and a license in order to begin working. This is a great occupation for entrepreneurial-minded people. 2/3 of funeral directors are self-employed. This is an extremely high percentage. This is greater than real estate agents proportionally. This is greater than a lot of other businesses where you just imagine that a lot of people in that occupation would be self-employed. One of the cons of becoming a funeral director is the size of the workforce. This is a pretty tiny workforce compared to other occupations. In order to become an employed funeral director, you might have to cross state lines in order to find job opportunities because there was only around 9,000 employed in 2019 across the entire United States. Overall, this is a great occupation for entrepreneurial-minded people. If you are a funeral home director, leave a comment down below. Let us know what your opinions are regarding salaries, entrepreneurial rates, the job market, and everything covered in this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.